Warning: Dungeons & Dragons contains material that is not suitable for children, people with heart conditions, weak-minded individuals, or anyone easily offended. If you are included in that list, then please stop watching this video now, for your own safety. Everyone else, sit back, relax, and enjoy the video.
This will be a review of Dragon Magazine issue 102, from October 1985. The article penned by Gary Gygax on his thoughts about how the game has been changed from what he designed with Dave Arneson.
Realms of Role-Playing. Let's Start Pushing the Pendulum the Other Way. By Gary Gygax. Copyright 1985 E. Gary Gygax. All rights reserved. There was a long period of time when action, rather than role-playing, was the major focus of gaming, and this was especially true with respect to tournament scenarios at conventions. Thus, an AD&D game scenario would typically stress combat with monsters to achieve the goal set before the characters. Now, the pendulum has swung the other way. Much emphasis is being placed on how well the player takes on the role of his or her character. Personification and acting are replacing action of the more direct and forceful type, be it sword swinging, spell casting, or anything else. Before this trend goes too far, it is time to consider what the typical role-playing game is all about.
Here, Gary is talking about how people, even in 1985, were turning the game into a storytelling exercise or a drama club class for amateur actors.
First, it is important to remember that role-playing is a modifier of the noun game. We are dealing with a game which is based on role-playing, but it is first and foremost a game. Games are not plays, although role-playing games should have some of the theater included in their play. To put undue stress upon mere role-playing places the cart before the horse. Role-playing is a necessary part of the game, but it is by no means the whole of the matter.
Next, Gary defines his terms and what he meant when he chose the term role-playing for the D&D game he created.
Role-playing is similar to, but not the same as, role assumption. The latter term is generally used to identify the individual's acceptance of a part which he or she could actually perform. While a child might play the role of a parent, an adult would assume that role when dealing with his or her children. This distinction is important in the context of gaming because of the stress now being placed upon role-playing. Too much emphasis in this direction tends to make playing out an adventure more of a children's let's pretend activity than an action-packed game which involves all sorts of fun, including the playing of a role but other fun aspects as well.
Using those terms, now's discussed how acting on a show, like Critical Role does today, is different from actually playing in a game.
A role-playing game should be such that players begin the personification portion as role-play, and then as they progress the activity should evolve into something akin to role assumption. This does away with stilted attempts to act the part of some character. In place of this, players should try to become that person they are imagining during the course of the game, and conduct the actions of their characters accordingly. A spy, for example, speaks in one way to his superiors, in another way when he converses with his equals, and in yet an entirely different way when he is attempting to penetrate an enemy installation and is impersonating a plumber, perhaps. Implemented in this fashion, the concept becomes one of roles within roles.
Having created the modern RPG, Gary speaks on how he feels they all should be similar to fit such a name as role-playing game.
This applies to all role-playing games, of course. Straining to play a role is certainly contrary to the purpose of the game. The actual reason for gaming is fun, not instruction in theatrics or training in the thespian art. Role-playing is certainly a necessary and desirable part of the whole game, but it is a part. Challenge, excitement, suspense, and questing are other portions equally necessary to a game of this nature.
Now, he discusses the parts of a role-playing game that make it a game.
Problem solving is the typical challenge in a role-playing game. Whether it is discovering a murderer, finding a magic sword, or seeking to expose a gang of criminals, this element is an integral part of such interactive gaming. And note that problem solving, in this context, has to do with a problem to be solved by the character, not a problem, such as how do I role-play this situation, to be solved by the player. Combat, survival amidst threatening conditions, or stalking an opponent are typical means of adding excitement and suspense into the whole. These are action-oriented portions of the game activity which call for little role-playing but a fair amount of role assumption. The magic user character, and thus, the player of that character, must know his or her spells and how to utilize them efficiently. The explorer must know outdoor craft. Whatever the situation, setting, or character being played, skill, not theatrics, is what is called for here. Having a goal, understanding it, and remaining steadfast in its completion are likewise necessary to role-playing games. This questing, if you will, again has little or nothing to do with role-playing in the acting sense. It is closer to role assumption and is a measure of gaming ability and skill.
There are many types of games like board, card, and puzzle games. But why are role-playing games different? Let's find out what he feels about that.
Role-playing games are different from other games in that they allow participants to create a game persona, develop this character, and enhance his or her skills and abilities. While some considerable amount of acting is most beneficial to play, this is by no means the sole objective or purpose. The fun of such gaming includes all the other elements mentioned, plus the interactive relationships which develop between the various characters of the players participating. In the well-balanced game, role-playing should quickly become role assumption, which then again leads to character role-playing, roles within roles. Not every game of this sort must be completely balanced with regard to all of these aspects. Such a decision is entirely in the hands of the game master and the players. If a particular group desires to stress acting, or combat, or problem-solving, or any other singular feature of the whole, that is strictly up to the individuals concerned. How they enjoy gaming, and what constitutes fun, is theirs alone to decide.
Notice in that last segment how Gary stated it is up to the players of the game, at their own tables, to decide how much of each part they should include in their games. There are many that would have you believe that RPGs are for storytelling only and say as much, or the acting that is modern role-playing, and if you are not doing it either of those ways you are doing it wrong. Gary was one step ahead of the curve, and forewarning of those people that would try to dictate their way as the one true way to play a game. I feel he was correct to be concerned as none of these people possess any respect for any other gamer, no matter which end of the spectrum they align with, as they do not think people have a right to make the choice for themselves as to how they wish to play the game they are playing. Next, Gary also warns of product for games that put such undue stress on one or more parts of the game, rather than the whole of the game, which has recently led to the pendulum swinging too far yet again.
This last point extends not only to players but to products as well. A particular game might be designed to stress one aspect over others. Role-playing can be the major thrust, or action and combat, or any of the other elements. Similarly, the underlying game might offer one or another while its accessories and scenarios develop some different aspects. Most games and support material are general and offer a reasonably well-balanced mix.
Do the products he mentioned sound anything like Strixhaven or Fizban's Treasury of Dragons, perhaps? Now, a reminder, D&D originated as a war game and was played at conventions, so this bit about tournament play may be confusing to some, but is included for posterity's sake.
But is this true for competition situations as well? In contrast to a long period when such tournaments tended to feature hack and slash, shoot 'em up, and blast 'em out situations, there is now a trend toward downplaying everything except the theatrical side of gaming. This tendency has evidenced itself to a lesser extent in some support materials, it must be noted. The reaction is not altogether unwarranted, for many participants seem to have been ignoring role-playing completely, or nearly so, in their games. Instead, it is usual for such games to stress direct, usually violent, action. This is a true detriment to fully appreciating the scope of role-playing games. As with most things, one extreme is just as undesirable as the other.
Back to the main topic of the pendulum.
The current vogue of placing seemingly undue importance on the role-playing portion of the game is simply meant to inform and educate participants about a very important segment of what differentiates these games from other types of games. It is to be hoped that the needed training thus afforded will enable game participants to go beyond role-playing of their characters and enter into role assumption instead. Once it is understood that role-playing is a vital ingredient of the game, and players understand how to actually accomplish it, the undue attention can be discarded. Balanced games are certainly the most enjoyable sort for the great majority of players. A meal does not consist of but one thing, if it is to be an enjoyable one. By the same token, a role-playing game must have all the ingredients which allow it to be varied and enjoyable. Playing an assumption of roles, interpersonal dealings, action, problem-solving, excitement, suspense, and questing are all important to make the whole. The portions can be mixed in different amounts, but each should have a degree of existence within the scope of the whole.
Here, I can only assume Gary was trying to talk to designers of games who wrote adventures, and in general to dungeon masters.
It is common for scenarios to identify the level of experience and skill recommended for those utilizing the material they provide. Perhaps it would be worthwhile to also identify any particular stress the scenario places upon a certain aspect of the game activity, role-playing, action, problem-solving, or any other.
I guess I was wrong. He is still discussing tournaments. I will blame the pandemic.
Tournament scenarios and competitions might also benefit by such identification. Prospective entrants would then be able to determine which aspect they favor, or possibly need to learn more of, before they enter the event. Participants who find their enjoyment lies in one area or another would thus be able to select events optimal for their tastes and avoid those which they might find less fun, making the competition experience more enjoyable for everyone who does take part. Is the player who has difficulty personifying a well-understood character any different from an excellent thespian who misplays the game otherwise? By being able to identify the focus of a scenario, not only would players be informed, but they would also be given the opportunity to round out their abilities in weak areas if they chose to do so.
Gary concludes on how, in 1985, the pendulum had swung too far, but needed to swing in order to develop beyond being just a medieval war game campaign playable with paper and pencil and miniature figures, but to develop fully into a role-playing game, such as he did with AD&D.
Play of the game is the thing. Play includes development of the character and personification thereof, role assumption and role-playing, and the rest. After all, fantasy in whatever form is integral. Whether fighting a dragon, piloting a starship, or shooting it out with evil enemy agents, the action imagined during the game is what really makes it fun. The pendulum did need to move a bit to balance things, but it must not go too far, or the realms of role-playing will become small and constricted instead of being, as they should be, as broad and varied as the imagination.
Once again, the pendulum is swinging too far. This time the company that makes D&D is swinging it like a battle axe at its own customers, due to undue stress placed on certain aspects by many Twitch streamers, YouTubers, TikTok users, and so on. This is not the way. We should all remember that when we sit down to game, each table will be different as each person has different likes. The DM will not sacrifice his own fun for the players, nor should they for the DM, as each person has the right to enjoy the game. I will close with the afterword from the first edition Dungeon Master's Guide. It is the spirit of the game, not the letter of the rule list, which is important. Never hold to the letter written, nor allow some barracks room lawyer to force quotations from the rulebook upon you, if it goes against the obvious intent of the game. As you hew the line with respect to conformity to major systems and uniformity of play in general, also be certain the game is mastered by you and not by your players. Within the broad parameters given in the Advanced Dungeons & Dragons volumes, you are creator and final arbiter. By ordering things as they should be, the game as a whole first, your campaign next, and your participants thereafter, you will be playing Advanced Dungeons & Dragons as it was meant to be. May you find as much pleasure in so doing as the rest of us do.